and rotate underneath a record player. It's very much a love it or hate it watch. I mean, I loved it just because I thought to myself, this is completely insane, who does this? There was something super, super appealing about it. If you want something that is really, really different and that's going to be a conversation piece, it's one of the most interesting watches out there.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to this special edition of CNN Newsroom. I'm Christiana Amanpour, live in Kyiv. A senior Ukrainian defense official says tonight this Kyiv region has, quote, been liberated from Russian forces. But U.S. officials are now saying that Russia is shifting its focus to victory by early May in eastern Ukraine. All this just days after Russia said it is de-escalating around this capital city, and Ukraine is bracing for heavy fighting in the east and the south. This is new video into CNN of gunfire and explosions used to disperse a crowd of pro-Ukraine protesters in the Russian-held town of Enerhoda, that's in the east. An advisor to President Zelensky is warning the days ahead will, quote, not be easy. Today, Russia unleashed an attack on a major fuel refinery in central Ukraine, one day after they accused Ukraine of targeting a fuel depot on Russia's side of the border. That, of course, was neither confirmed nor denied by Ukrainian officials. And all of this as the fight to evacuate trapped civilians is also intensifying. Today, the Red Cross is trying for the second day to reach the devastated city of Mariupol. 100,000 civilians are still trapped there. Video obtained from Twitter showed just how dire the situation is. It showed destroyed bridges and debris-filled streets. But let's begin right here in Kyiv with these developments. And our senior international correspondent, Fred Pleiken, he's joining me now. You know, this is pretty big. You know, 1 week after Russia said it was de-escalating, and you've been out and about, like I have, to see what's going on around here.
Yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely massive. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is just a couple of days ago when we were standing, you were standing here, I was standing here, we could hear the shelling going on the entire time when the Russians were hitting this place even harder than they had in the past. Now it's fairly quiet. We've had a couple of air raid sirens, I think, today, but you can really tell that there is more life in the city, and there seems to be a mood among the folks here in the city that they are pushing the Russians back. But as that happens, more and more things are becoming clear. And I think the two main things are that the Russians got absolutely clobbered here around the capital city.
Well, you're right about that, because I spoke to the foreign minister, and he said, you know, the fact that they're getting pushed back is not just because they want to. It's because our forces are pushing them back.
And I think that seems something that the more we get into these areas that have been liberated as the Ukrainians, but where the Russians have been pushed out, you see the amount of Russian armor that has been destroyed, but also some of the wreckage and just how destroyed some of these towns are. We managed to get to a place called Irpin, just northwest of here. Let's have a look at some of what we saw there. Ukrainian authorities say this is still one of the most dangerous places in this war-torn country, and we immediately see why. We are driving right towards an area engulfed in smoke from artillery shelling. This is where Russian forces tried to push into Ukraine's capital, but were stopped and beaten back by the underdog Ukrainians. The battles here are fierce. Authorities say 50% of the city has been destroyed. To us, that number seems like an understatement.
We have to keep moving quickly because this place can get shelled anytime.
Ukraine's national police now patrols Irpin again, but their forces frequently come under fire, the chief tells me. Just yesterday, our officers who were searching for dead bodies, they were shot at with mortars, he says. They had to lay under the bridge and wait for it to stop. But the grim task of finding and taking out the many dead continues. More than 24 on this day alone. So an absolutely awful situation there in Irpin. And Irpin, of course, was a really important place because that was where the Russians tried to break through here into Kiev. And that's really where the Ukrainian forces made that massive stand and managed to push them back.
And, you know, we've heard lots of names that have become totemic, really, in the battle. So Bucha is another one. That also fiercely contested. And now we're hearing some pretty grim news coming out of there.
We certainly are. And it's the Ukrainian government saying that they have found mass graves there and are already filling those mass graves. I think it's almost 300 bodies. So you can see just the toll that all this has taken. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more of in the next couple of days, that the civilian toll is massive.
And I think extraordinary, too. I mean, I went out to a little bit further out and saw a column, an armored column, including the T-90 tanks, which apparently are the most modern that Russia has. Anyway, blown to smithereens by the Ukrainians using javelins. Those obviously are unusable. But the Ukrainian officials are saying that any weaponry and armor that they find that they can be fixed, they're going to put it back on the road.
Yeah, they
with
do
their
exactly
own
that.
troops.
And this is one of the things about the Ukrainian military. Obviously, the Russian gear is exactly the same stuff that the Ukrainian military uses, right? It's all former Soviet stuff. And the T-90 tank, I mean, that is modern equipment. So for the Ukrainians to have gotten that, that was certainly a major feat. But there are, and we visited one of these workshops, there's a lot of workshops here where they get stuff that they find from the Russians, they do it up, sometimes they take all the old stuff out and then reuse these vehicles. The Ukrainians, I think it was President Zelensky, he said that the Russian army is the single largest supplier of gear to the Ukrainian army, simply because they're getting so much stuff from them.
And let's just, you know, kind of refocus on what the Russians seem to be refocusing on, and what the U.S. intelligence now says. They think Russia is aiming for a victory by May, but in the east.
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
Well, I think that means they're moving the goalposts. I mean, it's absolutely clear that at the beginning of this war, that the Russians thought they were going to get a quick victory here in Kiev. In fact, they tried to get in here through the main highway. They just rode, in some cases, unarmored trucks right into the city because they thought they would be greeted as liberators. Ukrainians told me this. They said they were surprised. And now they realize that they're not going to make it. They've gotten absolutely beaten back here, not just by the javelins, by the way, but also by artillery. They never really had a strategy. So now it seems as though they're moving the goalposts. And one of the things that we've seen today is that there already seems to be some of this Russian military gear that's coming out of here, moved to Belarus and put on trains, brought somewhere, possibly brought to the west of Russia, the east of Ukraine, to
come back in
Donbass,
that way.
to possibly come back over there. So it seems as though, and I think this is something that the foreign minister actually told you,
he did.
that he believes that it was the low-hanging fruit was, I think, what he
yeah,
said. It was
yeah.
the southeast of the country, where it seems as though the Russians are going to try and make a lot of headway there to then have a stronger position when these negotiations really start, you know, when they really talk about some sort of ceasefire.
Well, we'll see, but it really has been a dramatic week of change here in the Kyiv region. So, Fred, thanks a lot. And let's go now to the port of Odessa. And the regional military governor there says 3 missiles struck an area in that city on Friday. And Ed Lavendera is joining me from that southern city. So, Ed, what is the situation? Because obviously the Russians have been pounding a lot of that southern area, not yet getting to where you are, but maybe aiming for it.
Right, and that's the concern that I think many people here in Odessa and in the southern part of the country have. They're watching what's happening and unfolding there in the north where you are, and they're wondering what's next, what is the timing of it all. So here, when you walk around the streets of Odessa, you find this mixed sense of people trying to go about their daily lives. In the background, you see a city center completely fortified, bracing for what might be coming. You know, we went to a market and we came across a group of university students drinking coffee together and talking. And I asked them, I was like, is this normal, or does it just kind of appear like it's normal?
It's home and we can like live a normal life. But as for now, we don't know what's going to be tomorrow or in a week. Besides, everyone is afraid. If something's going to happen in Odessa, of course, we'll protect our city. But right now, we can just sit and live normal life.
And Christian, that's the thing. They feel like anything can change here at any moment. So you see volunteers and activists making bulletproof vests for frontline soldiers. And then 24 hours ago, you have 3 missile strikes here in the Odessa region. And that kind of brings everything to life once again of the dangers that they could be facing in the weeks ahead.
And of course, Odessa is, again, massively strategic, because if they did get it, it would really cut off Ukraine from its sea and its ports. Next door, practically next door, Mariupol is feeling the full brunt of a very, very brutal slaughter and a brutal attack on that civilian area. What do you know? Have anybody sort of trickled out today? Because the ICRC tried again today. They weren't able to get there. What's the latest from there?
Well, there were supposed to be 7 humanitarian corridors opened up throughout the country. There is a mixed bag of success. According to officials today, about 4,200 people were able to use these routes to escape. There was about 6,000 people that were able to escape nationwide. But when you take a closer look at Mariupol, where people in aid organizations are desperately trying to reach here to evacuate the more than 100,000 people that still need to be evacuated. This is an area where officials have been saying that the residents and the civilians in the city have been living like mice for weeks underground in bunkers under the homes. I mean, and one official even said, we are running out of adjectives to describe how bad the situation is. And as you mentioned, the International Red Cross tried to reach the city again today. It's been turned away. This has been going on for several days. We were told that about 1,200 people in that city were able to escape Mariupol today, but they did so in their own cars. What they need is a massive amount of buses to be able to move the vast numbers of people that need to be evacuated from there.
Indeed, and Ed, as you're talking, we see some video from Mariupol from earlier where there are downed bridges, and civilians are just trying to get across, however which way they can. So we'll keep watching that. Ed, thank you so much. And ahead, the United States has just announced new aid to Ukraine to stock up on weapons, armored vehicles, and Soviet-era tanks. Could the new security assistance be a game changer?
Egypt is developing a sustainable and inclusive transportation network to improve mobility across the country. By ensuring affordability and accessibility to public transport systems and reducing carbon emissions. It is responsibly connecting communities like never before.
The Dubai World Cup began in 1996. Back then, the Middle East was a small player on the global sporting stage. Fast forward to today, and it's expected to be the fastest growing region in the industry in the next 3 to 5 years.
I met up with the chairman of the Dubai Racing Authority, Sheikh Rashid bin Darmouk Al Maktoum, to talk about follies and more.
Eleni, welcome here to the Meydan Racecourse. You're actually walking on one of the best tracks in the world, which is the turf track. Horses that run on this safe ground are horses from all around the world. We believe this is a fair ground for all horses who like the soft ground or the fast ground.
Our mission here at CNN, the news comes first.
More breaking news that we are following right now. Welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
There were 3 strikes that hit this facility. This is as close as you're going to get.
Just look at the utter destruction caused by this massive explosion.
Imagine the good fortune of the truck driver. He managed to survive.
More than a month into the war here in Ukraine, and the refugee crisis continues.
It is not even remotely close to being a ceasefire.
In Kiev, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Lviv, this is CNN. Sources tell CNN the United States is now expected to help transfer Soviet-era tanks to Ukraine. It's unclear how many, but we're told that they will arrive within days. This after the U.S. announced another $300 million in new military aid, including suicide drones, night vision equipment, and armored vehicles. Joining me now to discuss is the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. He also served as a special representative for Ukraine negotiations. Also, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He was the commander of all U.S. Army forces in Europe. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Can I first ask you, General Hodges, what you make of the fact that what we've seen around Kiev and what the Ukrainians are now calling a liberated Kiev region? Are you surprised to be hearing that?
No, I'm thrilled about it, but not surprised. Ukrainian soldiers, as we've watched now for the last 5 weeks, have demonstrated a tactical skill as well as a tenacity that has been successful. I think now, Christian, we're in the decisive phase of the campaign. The next 3 weeks are going to determine, I think, what happens in the future if we can give Ukraine everything that they need to go ahead and break the back of the Russians right now.
So, Ambassador Volker, I mean, I know that you're the diplomat, but nonetheless, you know, there's diplomacy and there's, you know, it's backed by some kind of force often. And so it's kind of working. The Ukrainians, according to the Polish Prime Minister, said, you know, are fighting like lionhearts. That's what he told me. US is sending weapons. NATO is sending weapons. They're using them and they're effective. But they need more. What more would you want to see, you know, world leaders do now?
Well, I think there's a short term and a long term here. And General Hodges is exactly right about the short term. This is the time to lean in. The Ukrainians have stopped the Russian offensive. They've cut supply lines. They are now targeting those stranded Russian forces. And the Russians are pulling them back away from Kiev, from Kharkiv, from Mykolaiv. And so this is the time to lean in. The Russians will reconsolidate their forces in the east, and they will try to make new territorial gains. So we should be resupplying the Ukrainians with everything we can. And in particular, right now, there's a shift that we need to keep giving them air defense and anti-ship systems, but we also need to be thinking about heavier armor, artillery, and tanks so that they can advance and push out those Russian forces. All that is necessary, as you say, to create the conditions on the ground where diplomacy might then be effective. As long as the Russians think they have a military card to play, there is no serious negotiation going on. But the moment they realize that the Ukrainians are actually pushing them out, then there might be a scope for talks.
Okay, so that's an interesting question now to ask General Hodges, because you heard just now what the U.S. intelligence seems to think, that Russia is bent on a early May victory. That must mean that they have, I mean, it has to mean that they have reduced the scope of their ambitions, and that everybody here, including the government, believes it's all going to take place in the Donbass region. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, of course, you and all your viewers know, Christian, that 9 May is Victory Day in Russia. This is when they celebrate the end of what they call the Great Patriotic War, World War II, and it's a massive parade there in Red Square. This is going to be really embarrassing for President Putin on Victory Day to not have something to show for it. So I think that's why there's a priority on the Russian side to claim some sort of victory, which means it's going to be hell for people, whoever's left in Mariupol and everybody else there in the Donbass region. And that's another reason why we have got to press. Ambassador Volker used the phrase to lean in. I would agree with that. The Russians, now is the time to break their back so that they are not able to regroup, because they have shown from history that they can and will regroup if given the chance.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so that's a really important point, and it's a military question, and it's a diplomatic question, Ambassador. You've been involved in these negotiations with Ukraine in the past under different administrations. Do you see, I mean, just like the general said, it's time, if you're going to get a proper negotiation, to quote unquote break the back of the Russian machine here. Do you see any hope for any kind of settlement at this pace right now?
I think we have to think about this in a couple different ways. Is there hope for a settlement right now? No. The Russians are intent on a military victory, which they will not achieve. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians are intent on removing Russian forces from their territory. They look at the 2014 settlement, where Russians continued to occupy eastern Ukraine, and say, look what happened. That was a failure. It set the stages for today. No more. We have to push them out. And so I think that is a fundamental disconnect in their perspectives right now. And it's going to be the situation on the ground that determines where things go. As with General Hodges, however, I believe that this is already turning in Ukraine's favor. And if we look 3 months, 4 months down the road, I think we're going to see a Russia that has exhausted itself trying to defeat Ukraine, a Ukraine that survives as an independent and a European state, and a EU and the United States, UK, Canada, that are committed to Ukraine's reconstruction and redevelopment. So this is a real fundamental turning point in the war right now.
So let me ask you, General, I mean, you commanded land forces in Europe for a long time. You see, what the battlefield is. We've just heard some news from senior Ukrainian officials here. They believe, and they say, that there is progress in talks with the Russians that may, in the not too distant future, lead to this direct negotiation between President Zelensky and Putin. The Ukrainians have wanted that for a long time. The Russians have been stalling. So I guess the question for you in terms of the military landscape is, can the Russians afford to hang in and even beyond May, Victory Day and all the rest of it, try to secure some kind of victory? Do the Ukrainians need to go for a proper settlement while they have what by and large seems to be the upper hand in most parts of the country?
Well, first of all, we need to hear our administration and our allies talk about winning, to use the word win instead of so much emphasis on avoiding escalation, and there's so much talk about getting a settlement. And I think that I take President Zelensky at his word. He says, until the Russians have left Ukrainian territory, now is the chance to correct the mistake of 2014 that Ambassador Volker referenced, to get the Russians out of Ukraine. And if we don't, then for sure the Russians are going to wait for us to lose interest in the Black Sea region for 2 or 3 years, and they're going to come back. And so this has implications not only for Ukraine, but for all of Russia's periphery. Our president a week ago said this is about democracy versus autocracy. This sounds to me like we need to talk about winning and achieving an objective, not rushing to get a settlement that rewards Russia in any way for the murder of thousands of innocent Ukrainians.
Interesting you should put it that way, General, because the French leaders have also said winning is a strategic necessity, not just for Ukraine, but for the West as well. General Hodges, Ambassador Volker, thank you so much for joining me. And we are going to take a short break now, and we'll be back with much more.
My name is Thierry Driessens. I'm Digital Transformation Officer for DHL Supply Chain. Today, if you look at what's happening these days, we go from crisis to crisis. That's going to be a fact, but the question is how do we react to that? How do we resolve the issues that arise from whatever is going to happen? So we had lots of disruptions, of course, and some of our customers came to a standstill, like the automotive industry. Some others boomed. E-commerce was booming, pharma was booming. We had peaks of operations that we'd never seen before, so we have to be ready. I believe a lot in digital representation of your physical reality, and that will allow us, for example, to do simulations on what's happening in real time in the supply chain, but also do some scenarios on what could happen. One thing is for sure, the future of supply chain is going to be more digital tomorrow than it is today.
I'm Rafael Romo in Lviv, Ukraine. This is CNN.
Sunday, Russia's Ukraine invasion and a strong man's grip on power. A former oligarch gives Fareed his take on the sentiment in Russia. Could this unprovoked war be Putin's downfall? Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sunday.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Putin's war in Ukraine is putting increased pressure on his political allies, especially in Europe. Hungarian President Viktor Orban is a longtime Putin supporter who's facing his toughest re-election bid in years, as his opponent argues that Orban is simply following in the Russian leader's footsteps. Matt Rivers is joining me now from the capital, Budapest. And Matt, polls are opening in just a few hours. The election's tomorrow. It's tight. What do you think? Can Orban hold on to power?
He certainly has a chance, but you said that this is one of the closest races in years. Part of that is because literally every single opposition party has joined together from across the ideological spectrum in kind of a desperate attempt to defeat Orban and prevent him from staying in power another 4 years. That said, Christiana, if you would have asked people 2 months ago what the top issue was, it certainly would not have been Ukraine. Everything has changed since Putin invaded Ukraine. Viktor Orban, by most measures, is the EU leader closest to Vladimir Putin recently. Just 3 weeks before the war began, Orban took a trip to Moscow, welcomed by Putin across a very long table. National elections in Hungary on Sunday will test whether Orban's 12-year run as prime minister will go another 4 years, and his relationship with Putin is suddenly at the center of Hungarian politics. What began as a campaign focused on local issues now has opposition leaders determined to link Orban with Putin and his bloody war in Ukraine, with political attack ads painting Orban as Moscow's puppet, a strongman leader determined to side with authoritarian Russia instead of the democratic West. This ad saying, quote, "We want Hungary to be a Western country again. If you're voting for Orban, you're voting for Putin." Or this one saying, quote, "Orban, tell your friend of 12 years, don't kill." Orban has undeniably supported Putin, vetoing sanctions against Moscow over the years and expanding the Russian-Hungarian partnership.
Pro-Russian policies of Viktor Orban, which are a very important building block of his entire political vision, are now exposed.
And with Putin's popularity plummeting, the opposition calculus is simple. Orban plus Putin equals a winning political strategy. But not so fast. Because Orban is fighting back. Call it a flip-flop, call it a pivot, but Orban is no longer Putin's best buddy. Even though he's not openly criticizing him personally, the Hungarian leader went along with initial EU sanctions against Russia, has described the invasion as Russian aggression, and despite being vehemently anti-immigrant for years now, has let in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees in the past few weeks. He says we are a great country, which gives everything to people who are fleeing trouble. Since the war began, Orban has refused to let weapons pass through Hungary to Ukraine or provide military aid. But he's deflected any criticism of that by claiming he is simply a man of peace, counting on the notion that many Hungarians want nothing to do with the war.
The gut reaction of most of the public is that, we should just not get involved with this stink. Yep.
And Orban has taken advantage of that sentiment.
And that's what they are trying.
Whether it works remains to be seen, but polling, which isn't always reliable in Hungary, has Orban and his party out in front. One big name the opposition hopes will change that.
Послухай, Вікторе, знаєш, що відбувається в Маріуполі? Ви маєте самі вирішити, за кого ви.
That's, of course, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has criticized what he calls Orban's lack of support for Ukraine's fight for its existence. But it's not clear if that will be enough. At an anti-Orban rally on Saturday, Ukraine flags flew, and the crowd kept pushing the Orban-Putin narrative. But not many people showed up. Whether that's an ominous sign for the opposition or just the result of cold, rainy weather, we'll find out when the votes come in. Now, Orban is still trying to find ways to help out his old friend Vladimir Putin. For example, he initially went along with EU sanctions, but Orban has said he will not go along with any ban on Russian energy being imported here to Hungary. He says that that would make life harder for ordinary Hungarians, more expensive, which is true, but at the same time, it's pretty convenient that it also continues to allow Vladimir Putin access to this energy market, something that can be lucrative. So it's, they're still trying to find some ways, I think, Orban is, to help out Vladimir Putin. Christian?
Indeed, and you heard President Zelensky lay into him, really. Matt Rivers, thank you so much. And let's just not forget that Hungary defines itself as an illiberal democracy. It is practically autocratic, and it figures very, very importantly in President Biden's attempt to win, democracy versus autocracy. So it's an important election. Now, as the war in Ukraine enters its 6th week, we're seeing more scenes of destruction. This week, I visited a town just east of Kyiv Kyiv, where Ukrainian fighters pushed back Russian forces early in the war. But now they wait in an uneasy calm for the next assault. The first thing you notice approaching the front northeast of Kyiv are the lines of villagers waiting for humanitarian handouts. They receive a bag of bread and basics to get them through these difficult days. The first week of the war, a shell hit us near the greenhouse. We barely survived, says this woman. We had help from strangers around us. They gave us bread and canned food. We wouldn't have managed otherwise. No one here knows when this war will end or whether Russia still has designs on Kyiv. The front line is about a mile away. For now, an uneasy calm prevails ever since the Ukrainian defenders stopped the Russian advance here. It was February 28th, they say, day 4 of the war. They want to show us how they did it, but first we have to clamber over the bridge they downed to see the armored column they managed to take out. The riverbank is littered with their skeletons, and this was a turkey shoot. Russian armored vehicles and tanks had come off the road to avoid the anti-tank mines, only to find themselves unable to cross the bridge and unable to reverse in time. Ukrainian forces tell us none of the soldiers inside survived. A little further up the road, 2 tanks have been virtually smelted, blasted almost to smithereens. 40-year-old Yevgeny, a veteran fighter, proudly tells us this was his handiwork. We all here have one role: to keep the enemy off our land, he says. First thing they did after seeing the village, they started to shell houses, just like that. They didn't see us. They didn't know we were here, so they just started to work on houses. And so I took the tank in my sights and I fired a rocket, and goodbye to him. The destroyed vehicles are stamped with an O. The Ukrainian officers here tell us this identifies them as Russian units that entered from Belarus to the north. Oleg is the officer who commanded this operation. As for now, looking at previous fighting we've had, I can tell you that we are trained better, he tells me. We have stronger morale and spirit because we're at home. They are afraid, but they go because they're made to. He's been battle-hardened ever since the first Russian invasion in 2014. He says his side has enough weapons, ammunition, and determination to win. I can tell you I'm almost sure the Russians are regrouping and not retreating, he says. Besides, we are preparing ourselves to go forward. We're not preparing just to defend here. US and British intelligence say Putin seems to have, quote, massively misjudged this situation and clearly overestimated the abilities of his military to secure a rapid victory. And this old lady tells us, I have seen one war and here we go again. I wish Putin would go away. The people of this land remain stalwart and the soldiers remain dug in, hoping they can continue to withstand whatever Putin has in store for them next. So, as we heard, senior officials saying that actually this whole region, they say, has now been liberated. And up next, we take you to Mykolaiv, where Russia is continuing its onslaught of attacks. And we're learning the death toll from a devastating attack on the office of the regional military governor is rising there. That town's mayor joins us ahead.
Today we live in an unpredictable environment and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening.
There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going?
And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN. All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. transform lives. Two artists draw inspiration from their communities and their surroundings.
My production or my process has created a value chain within the community. It has created jobs.
African Voices Changemakers, only on CNN, in association with Glow.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
When life gives you lemons, rejoice. In fact, make sure your fruit bowl is always full of lemons. Here's why. Lemons are full of vitamin C and antioxidants, and drinking a glass of lemon water in the morning is a great habit to get into. It helps you hydrate, and the lemon provides vitamins. Lemon water can be helpful in preventing kidney stones as well. And if you don't like lemon water, consider making a healthy salad dressing or marinade out of freshly squeezed lemon. Lemons are also useful around the house. Lemon juice is good as a cleaner with antiseptic and antibacterial qualities. Mixed with vinegar, lemon juice is a great surface and glass cleaner too. Some quick lemon tips: store them at room temperature, keep them out of direct sunlight, and use them as quickly as you can. Lemons are best right after they're picked.
My name's Pippa Bailey. I work for Ipsos and I'm head of our climate change and sustainability practice. So many companies that we speak to struggle with, how to talk about sustainability, how to share the great campaigns that they're doing. And there's kind of a number of guidelines people need to follow. First of all, making sure you've got your own house in order, that your own environment, social and governance policies are heading in the right direction before you then go kind of on the offensive with a campaign where you want to illustrate what great work you're doing. But also to kind of avoid greenwashing is making sure that that really fits under the brand banner, that it represents what your brand is about, so that it feels very intuitive for consumers, for citizens.
A Ukrainian photojournalist missing for nearly 3 weeks has been found dead north of Kyiv. According to the Ukrainian Attorney General, photographer Maxim Levin was killed by Russian troops. He was known as Max. Levin worked for a number of Western outlets, including the BBC and Reuters. One of Levin's friends described him as an energetic and tenacious reporter who often looked like he had no fear. Reuters released a statement today saying in part that Levin's death is a huge loss to the world of journalism, and at least 6 of our colleagues have been killed while covering this war on Ukraine. I want to head now to Mykolaiv. It's been days since a Russian missile strike on a government building in the southern city there, but the death toll from that attack keeps rising. The number now stands at 36. The mayor of the city, Alexander Senkevich, is joining me now. Mr. Mayor, thank you and welcome to the program. Tell me about the situation in that building that you continue to, I guess, pull bodies from there. Do you think the death toll will rise any further?
The operation is still going on. Right, we got 36 people out of the ruins. 34 of them were dead and 2 of them died in the hospital. We have more, I'd say 35 people injured. but let's say 8 of them in hard situation, all others left home. And we keep looking for more people.
And just to be clear, of what strategic value was that building in terms of military value? Why do you think that building was attacked?
For sure, that building was attacked because of a head of a regional administration, Vitaly Kim. Because I would say that the missile, the guided missile, cruise missile, just hit his office. And I would say that only 4 armed people who were guards on the first floor died while this attack. All other people were just civilians, office workers who worked in the humanitarian sphere with refugees, with food and everything. So no military object, no tanks or something like that were there.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know whether you can judge from where you are right now, but you've probably heard your senior officials here in the capital, Kyiv, say that the Kyiv area has been, in their words, liberated. And we have witnessed ourselves, you know, Russian forces being pushed back or just like moving back. They're obviously going to be regrouping, as it appears, to the south, to the east. What do you make of that when you're sitting there in Mykolaiv and under shelling? Does that give you hope?
No, I don't believe to Putin. I think the Russian troops are regrouping and they fall back just to get more force from Russia and to go to the east and to the south where we are. And for sure, in the previous episode of your program, someone said that Putin overestimated force or strength of his troops. But I would say he underestimated the strength of Ukrainians. And for sure, we are ready to meet him here again and fight with his troops here on the south.
So in your town, do you have enough to fight back? Do you have enough weapons? The last time I spoke to you on the air, you said you had enough, but I'm just wondering whether that's still the case.
Sure. We're getting more lethal weapon from the West, from the United States and NATO. We're getting more troops. We train our troops from territorial defense. Last 2 days, we had fights on outskirts of the city from the Kherson area, and we won in those fights, and the Russians fell back. But they still gathered their group of troops, and plan to go further, as I think.
You just mentioned Kherson. It's not a huge town, but it is the only town that the Russians have been able to take. No major cities, but of course they're pounding Mariupol, which is, again, not that far from you. Are you receiving any? I mean, are you seeing any of the citizens trying to get out? What do you think will be the eventual fate? Can Ukrainian forces hang on there?
Let's say we lost Kherson because we had not too much troops there, and the start of this war was so, let's say, unexpected, so we had no ability to empower them there. So let's say they haven't got Kherson, they just moved in Kherson, and people, armed people, fall back to Ukraine here, to Mykolaiv region. Now we don't have connection with the occupied area, and several, let's say, buses from the Kherson region come here with refugees. We're getting them here in Mykolaiv. We give them food and etc. and send them back to, forward to the west.
Mayor Alexander Stankiewicz, thank you so much. And still ahead, Pope Francis takes on Vladimir Putin, blasting the Russian leader for launching, quote, a savage war in Ukraine. Could we see the Pope make a trip here to Kyiv? A live report next.
All new Inside Africa. Go inside the inventive minds, evolving places, and creative trends of the Africa you need to know now. Nigeria's emerging musical artists are ready for the global stage.
But now I can record my music in my house gets on the internet and distributes it to the world.
Inside Africa on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
Free the Girls is an anti-trafficking organization that was started to help survivors re-enter the workplace through the sale of secondhand bras in used clothing markets around the world. My name is Dave Terpstra, and I'm co-founder of Free the Girls. One of the things that we discovered that survivors struggle with is getting back into society after they've been rescued, after they've been rehabilitated. How do they re-engage real life? And so we created a program that's designed to help them start their own micro-enterprise and grow their own business for themselves. We have women donate bras, and as we say, bras are something women wear close to their hearts. And this is an issue that touches the hearts of many women, and they want to play a part. They hear about these women who are traumatized, who have been trafficked around the world in terrible situations, and this is such a tangible way for them to reach out. When CNN first came 10 years ago to tell our story, we hadn't yet shipped our first container of bras. And CNN was there to record the entire process when that container arrived. That first container had 30,000 bras. We've since shipped 9 40-foot containers. Over 1 million bras have come here to Mozambique for our women to sell. That has transformed some lives.
It is actually very complicated to move money around the world. Few companies can do it at scale. Few companies can do it in the number of countries that we do it. And so these companies that come together, like MoneyGrams and like our competitors, do really provide a very unique service, and that is to instantly move money, get funds from the United States to Mexico, literally in sub-seconds. For the ability to take $350 that you worked hard to earn and get it back to your mother so that she can pick it up in Mexico, use it for food, healthcare, housing, is actually a very unique service. If you're from many of the countries, Mexico, Philippines, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, some of the largest receive markets in the world, it's absolutely critical to the lives of the consumers in those countries. But many people don't appreciate that. If it's not the life that you live, then it's not something that you really ever really get involved in.
We live in such a fast-paced world where the news has been so relentless. Historic events have happened one after the other. I think that you need that daily appointment with viewers around the world to try and sort through the news of the day. What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Hala Garani tonight.
I'm Arwa Damon in Istanbul. This is CNN.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
The Russian war in Ukraine has turned more than 4 million Ukrainians into refugees. Now, that's just across the borders. There's another 6 million who are internally displaced. About half of all the refugees are children, according to the UN. Now, some babies are being born beyond Ukraine's borders. And CNN's Kyung La has the story of one Ukrainian infant born into a family that's been torn apart by this war.
Born just hours ago in Poland, baby Adelina is already a survivor of the war in Ukraine.
Is it hard to be happy?
It is, she says. Adelina is Kristina Pavluchenko's first child.
You feel guilty? Why?
Because I left, she says. left her home in western Ukraine. The war had begun. The bombing neared their city. Pavlichenko escaped by bus, then walked on foot across the border. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. She delivered Adelina a month early, separated from her family.
Mama, sestra.
My mother, sister, grandparents still in Ukraine. He's killing our people, she says of Vladimir Putin. How could anyone be so cruel?
I'm terrified. I'm terrified that something like this can happen, that you can lead your everyday life and all of a sudden, because of decisions that you have no influence upon, there is a war and you have to flee. It's unbelievable. It's terrifying.
Dr.